Hi, my name is Amanda Baker. I have created something called Jeske Leather. I'm currently wearing some of it. This is something I made from one of the pieces, and I detailed the steps on how to make this in a separate video. Right now I want to go over a little bit more into the discussion of how I came into the development of this. So I have a whole bunch of different samples here, and these are the ones that I like the best. These are walnut oil sulfur only, no glycerin, and they are still super malleable, which was the main issue on making these, was figuring out how to get them to be malleable. The sulfur addition came from watching a Veritasium video on rubber vulcanization and realizing that sulfur is pretty great for stuff like that, for having a bunch of spare electrons to go around and making some really great covalent bonds. I tried it out and it worked really good. I started with normal Scoby and dried it out, and it got really brittle, and I needed to figure out how to treat it so that way it wouldn't dry out and get brittle. I wanted to try polymerizing oils. I know that linseed oil is a really great polymerizing oil. Walnut oil is a pretty good polymerizing oil. I tried the oil treatments on thinner Scobies. They all just broke. One of my first attempts at using the polymerizing oils was this sample, which is now over a year old, but I can crumple it, fold it. It doesn't stick to itself. It's got this really nice dark color. This sample turned out really, really well, but I think that's only thanks to the thickness of the Scoby. I think this Scoby was about an inch thick. I don't know if you can tell, but there's tiny little holes here from where I sewed it and then pulled the stitching out to see if it would tear from the holes, and it does not. And I don't know if you can tell from there, but there's also still stitching in this, and it took stitch really well. I have another sample here that was treated with linseed oil and was dehydrated at 105 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 hours. It was then left to air dry for a month or so, and that wound up removing a lot of the moisture inside of it. And so I treated it with a coating of glycerin, which made it a lot more malleable. Originally, before the glycerin, it was entirely too brittle and it was hard as a rock. You couldn't bend it, you couldn't really do anything to it unless you were going to snap it in half. Now, it bends and such, but it's still a little bit brittle. You can still poke holes in it and whatnot. It's not a very good leather sample. The glycerin was applied too late. If the glycerin had been applied immediately after dehydration, before all of the moisture was entirely lost in the sample, then it would have retained enough plasticization from that emulsifier to be viable as like a leather. These are some other samples of linseed oil treated Scobies that were dehydrated at 105 degrees Fahrenheit for 10 hours and then left to air dry for a few months or so, and then glycerin was applied. These were all of the samples that I thought were going to be completely unviable, and when I found out that the glycerin was the emulsifier that I was looking for to give plasticization to the material, I got really excited, and I took all those old samples I thought I was going to have to toss out, because I wound up tossing out quite a few samples, and I slapped glycerin on a lot of them, and they are malleable now. Before the glycerin treatment, if I had taken this and done this, it would have crumbled into flakes and dust. Here's a walnut sample, a walnut oil sample that was a thinner Scoby that had been treated with walnut and then dehydrated and then left to air dry for a month to a few months and then given glycerin, and it also is a bit more malleable now. Very weak. This is another sample of an older sample that had been treated with walnut oil and then dehydrated and then glycerin was applied. This sample was not as old. The sample still had some moisture in it. It was still pretty old, like a week, 2 weeks old. So there wasn't a lot of moisture in it, but it's one of the most viable old samples after glycerin was applied. So you have a little bit of time to get that glycerin on it, but you probably don't want to wait too long. This is a sample that was treated with walnut oil only, and then dehydrated, and then immediately had glycerin applied. The immediate application of the glycerin makes this incredibly malleable. Like I can roll this up into a little ball. The issue that I have with this is that it sticks to itself so much, and it picks up dirt like crazy. And if you have pets or long hair, it'll stick. It'll pick it up, and it gets kind of gross. It's not hard to get it off. You can just do this, and it'll rub right off of it. However, it does act very saran wrappy, especially on the edges. The edges will curl in. But I'll come back to talking about the glycerin because this sort of application is entirely different from leather. To get back to the leather, I want to talk about these two samples, which are honestly my favorite samples for the leather. These are treated with a mixture of walnut oil and sulfur applied before dehydration. Then they're dehydrated, and that's it. It's just polymerizing oil and sulfur. I have yet to try it with linseed or other seed or nut oils, but I'm assuming that like any polymerizing oil would work just fine mixed with sulfur. The cross-linking that happens thanks to those sulfur bonds is extraordinary. It's acting as a plasticizer. I didn't have to add an emulsifier at all, and I can totally crumple these up just as much as the ones that are treated with the glycerin. However, these are not sticky. They don't stick to themselves really, and they don't pick up as much dirt. They're not as gross. This method also allows for the use of much thinner scobies than I would have thought would work. So I think the thinnest I've been able to get it down to is about 0.3 centimeters. The thicker the Scoby, the tougher the leather is gonna be. Kind of like if you're tanning a hide. Like deer hide's gonna be a lot tougher than rabbit hide. I think the polymerizing oil sulfur mix application then dehydration is gonna be the best way to go about it, unless you want something super malleable and mildly sticky. Which this jewelry piece that I'm wearing is treated with glycerin, and it is a little bit sticky, and I wouldn't wear it with anything white because it does leach color. I wrapped it in a paper towel for transport, and it leaches. It leaches pretty bad. I wouldn't recommend using the glycerin application on stuff that you're going to be using for jewelry or for clothing or for things like that. I would stick to using the glycerin application for medical, which is what I'm going to get into now. I'm going to go ahead and call this video also an intro into the baker's bandage. So this stuff for the polymerizing oil with sulfur dehydration, that's like the Jeske Leather process. The polymerizing oil sulfur application or the polymerizing oil and then dehydration and then glycerin application, that's more of baker's bandage process. And the baker's bandage, because of the glycerin, will allow for a higher rate of absorption for any sort of dermally applied medicines that are put on it and then applied to the skin. I was working on developing it for that because if I make like herbal poultices or things like that and I mush it up and then I try to like stick it on my hand, it's really hard to keep it on there. Like it'll rub off, it'll fall off. But if I had something to wrap it in, that'd be nice. But wrapping it with cloth was it would soak into the cloth instead of my skin, and it was not so great. This works extremely well. And the funny story is that I was making a Halloween costume and out of this, and I thought, oh man, it would look really cool to put iodine on it because it would make it look bloody. Put it on, it looked like fake skin, like it was peeling, and, you know, burned at the edges and stuff like that. It was really good. It worked really well. And on the way to the Halloween party, I started getting a fever, I started getting nauseous, and I started cognitively declining, and I was like, what in the world is going on? And my brain was like, it's the iodine! And I was like, oh my god, it is the iodine! The surface area that I'd covered on my body, that dermal application with the glycerin, because the glycerin increases the rate of absorption, it was so fast. And after I took it all off, it only took a little while for the symptoms to go away. But oh my gosh, I was like, I think something's really wrong. Be careful out there. Yeah, I think the best way to make the baker's bandage is to do a sulfur treatment with a polymerizing oil. You could try just doing a sulfur treatment and then doing the dehydration process and then applying the glycerin, which should work. And the sulfur will hopefully allow for a bit of antibacterial, antifungal properties to the bandage wrap itself. You can make it in any shape you want because you can grow it yourself. I would say the only limit is the size of your dehydrator. And when I say dehydration, I mean dehydration with a fan of some kind. You need the flow of oxygen in order to allow for that cross-linking to happen. And it's not just oxygen, it's other atmospheric gases that can allow for cross-linking and whatnot, but it's mostly oxygen, especially for the polymerization that happens with the oils and their oxidative processes and whatever. I'm not like, I don't know exactly what's going on. I just kind of get the gist of what's going on, and I'm able to make stuff. I very highly encourage y'all to try it out. Try it out. Make stuff. See what you can do. See what better processes are out there. Make products. Sell stuff. Jewelry, clothes, bandages. Who knows? Go for it. This has been a lot of fun, and I plan on making a lot more things. I plan on maybe patenting at least one of them. I didn't want to patent the Jeske Leather or the Baker's Bandage. I wanted that to be fully public and out there, because I think that the more people who have access to it, the more cool stuff will be made, and more cool stuff needs to be made. There are already patents out there for mass production of Scobies, and I'm sure the more people that look into it and the more people that think about it, the better methods we'll figure out. I think this can replace a lot of plastic and a lot of plastic usages in different areas. I'm not saying it'll replace everything all at once, and this is the, you know, end all be all. I'm sure you will discover something amazing, just like I did by messing around. I will try to do more videos that are a bit more in-depth on the chemistry of things and stuff like that. I'll try to get access to people who know more about how this stuff works than I do. I guess that's all for now.